Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Russell Jensen. My Tlingit name is Shakaguk. I'm Teeyhíttaan, child of the Kwashkikwan and a grandchild of a Shukachedi. I'm the Development Officer here at Sealaska Heritage, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's lecture during our Native American History Month lecture series. Thank you for joining online and in person here at SHI, and thank you for providing your proof of vaccination. Please remain masked during the duration of the lecture today. If you need to use the restroom, they're available upstairs on the second floor. And please remember to silence your cell phones at this time. At SHI, we strive to provide programming for you, including celebration, Baby Raven Reads, and other language, culture, art, and educational programs. Grants cover a significant majority of our operations. However, not all of our operations are funded. So please consider contributing individually if you can. You can donate online at sealaskaheritage.org/donate. The lecture today is titled In His Own Words, a biography of William Lewis Paul, and is presented by Benjamin Starr Paul, whose Tlingit name is Ku-nuX-nuhsti. Ben is Teeyhíttaan Raven and a grandson of William Paul. There will be an opportunity for question and answers at the very end. Please type your questions in the chat or save them if you're here in the audience. Thank you and welcome, Ben. Thanks.
Thank you for that introduction. I would just add a little bit to it. My own father is William Paul Jr. Ku-nuX-nuhsti was his name, and the first son of William Lewis Paul. And William Lewis Paul's mother was Tillie Paul Tamari, Katliud, also Teeyhíttaan Raven clan. What I would like to do here is play the speech of William Lewis Paul that he gave at the 1972 Whitworth University. It was an acceptance speech for an honorary doctorate that they were giving him. And it was taken from a reel-to-reel that was in possession of my grandfather. And I might add that if I drop into saying grandpa and grandma, and dad, grandpa is William Lewis Paul, grandma is his wife, Frances Lackey Paul, and she does come into the discussion at the end. But the recording is a little rough, so I'm going to use a transcript that I did also. And you can read along. There's a couple of spots in it where he jumps around a little bit, and we'll clear those things up and go over the second half of the speech, which the first half is a list of things that he accomplished, and they asked him to put his life into 20 minutes. It's and he did that, but of course a lot got left out, and we'll put some meat on the bones, so to speak, for the second half of the speech, which is more a philosophical, religious, God working in my life kind of thing, which doesn't get considered that often. So I'm going to start the vocal here. Guess I'm not. Okay.
include previous events for obvious reasons. Some people will consider that my narration is wrong, but believe you me that my life in Alaska has been so eventful that this story will indeed be short. For I have impressed my life and character on the now state of Alaska. I am 85 years of age, or will be on May 7th. And when my epitaph is written, it will include the following. 1. I integrated the public schools of Alaska. 2. I demonstrated by legal action the rights of the Indians and other natives to vote. 3. I got laws enacted that removed the words of discrimination in public assistance provisions for the mothers of destitute children. Also for direct relief for the aged poor. 4. I got the first appropriation from Congress for the direct relief of Indian destitution. 5. I promoted the advent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in order to get its Department of Medical Aid to stop the high mortality rate of infants. 6. I got Congress to extend the Indian Reorganization Act, IRA, to Alaska, by and through which over $20 million has been expended for Indian economy. The failure or partial failure of which was due to the communistic philosophy and paternalism of that department. 7. I was the leader in the legislative fight for equal rights, especially in public service, and thus ended segregation in restaurants, theaters, transportation, and schools. 8. I made the Alaska Native Brotherhood a powerful political organization by and through which many beneficial laws were enacted by candidates supported by the Indians. 9. I was a leader in securing schools for many Indian villages, Angoon, Teeyhíttaan, Teeyhíttaan, and others. 10. I wrote and introduced the bill that adopted the present state flag and inspired Marie Drake to write that most beautiful poem in the state song. There are many other things that I could mention, but you asked that my narration should be short. I have been able to supply the knowledge, the various skills, and the devotion necessary for some many things that have upped the material and spiritual welfare of my people, that I attribute the labyrinthic course of my life to the following. There is a great power called by various names by all people who has a purpose in creation. And when he needs a man to implement this purpose, lo and behold, he or she is ready. Call it predestination or fatalism, if you wish. So I like to look back in the pages of history for proof. It becomes more impressive and more wonderful when I put the proof of my own life. For all my plans have been set aside, and I am where I am, and sort of pushed into what I am about to relate. Within the span of my mother's life, 1863 to 1952, she was the first female elder of our church, and is known as Tillie Paul, and in the service of our Presbyterian Church for 70 years, widowed by the accidental death of my father, Louis, a lay preacher, who escaped the unwanted marriage after prayer to her unknown God, made her first prayer to this God in a commercial jargon canoe, sheltered by a Methodist missionary, and returned to her home to find the A.R. McFarland Home for Girls. Everything that happened to her and to me seems like a miracle. because of her, I was raised in the Presbyterian Sitka Training School and unknowingly became a Christian and made that fact known to the world when I was 16 years of age at Carlisle, Pennsylvania. At Sitka, I came under the influence of several wonderful men and women, and as I look back today, I see that they shaped my life. I didn't know it, but I was being led in preparation for which I regard as my life work, namely, a missionary in the field of law for a primitive people who did not need another preacher, but did need a lawyer. At Sitka, I became the bosom friend and playmate of a number of boys and girls with whom I was to be joined in the great Creator, by the great Creator in the work which is credited to me when actually I was only the errand to their collective Moses. When I returned to them from Whitworth College and 10 years of business experience, they had reached the area of inquiry, knowing that things were wrong, but not what, and lacking in God. Even in the matter of marriage, due to our Tlingit culture, the man had to be of the right clan, with distinctive totem, namely a purebred. He had to be opposite to her raven. Besides this, he had to be religious-minded and of the right caste. He was, and they were married, and were sent by the Presbyterian Church to the most warlike tribe of Tlingit Indians. And again, destiny had prepared him, for there was his tribesman, far removed from the southern branch at Cape Park, known in history as 54 Fort. There they began the work of preserving the Tlingit morality and culture, later to be incorporated by me in the preamble of the Constitution of the Alaska Native Brotherhood in these words: to oppose, to discourage, and to overcome the narrow injustice of race, to commemorate the fine qualities of the native races of North America, to preserve their history, law, art, and virtues, to cultivate the morality, education, commerce, and civil government of Alaska, and a true respect for the Constitution of the United States, unquote. On my 14th birthday, I left my home in Sitka and said goodbye to my mother, whose illness had kept her there for 3 years, and I would never have thought that I might never see her again, only looking forward to the great adventure at the famous Carlisle Indian School. And there I came under the influence of one of the great men of his era, namely Richard Henry Pratt, who escaped the confinement of the Southern Apaches at San Marcos near St. Augustine, Florida, for the discipline of a school at the old Hessian Army Barracks of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where he demonstrated that the Indian was, first of all, a human. There I learned it can be done. In school and the football field, I helped to demonstrate this as a member of Whitworth's greatest team of 1908, defeating, among others, the University of Oregon. I graduated in 1902 from the school and planned to enter Teeyhíttaan College Law School in the fall. But my mother got sick again and I went home, and so gave up my chance of easy expense with a football scholarship. At Wrangell, I languished with no place to go except the current saloons, so I became a church worker. Due to a schism in our church, our membership got so low that the New York office gave orders to abandon it. But for 2 women, Mrs. Colonel Mason, formerly of Boston, who played the lead organ beautifully, and my mother, it would have been closed. I preached the sermons when we couldn't get someone else. Today our entire denomination rejoices that Wrangell still has the first Protestant church in Alaska. During this time, I got to know the feel of the people, especially the Indians. While the Indians always believed that they owned the land from time immemorial, the whites of all descriptions, officials, prospectors, missionaries, and all others told the Indians that this is government land. So the Indians became the wilderness, and so their lands were usurped by the squatters. And there was nobody to help out. I always knew that I would go to college, but how or when I didn't know. So I applied for work and was asked, how long will you stay in my employment? I would answer, I plan to go to school, and there would go my job. It looked helpless because each year ended without a profit from commercial fishing and hand logging. I was proud of my physical strength, and I made even more muscle, which was to be useful later. In 1905, I agreed to go trapping with my stepfather. Just as we were about to start, I got into a violent altercation with my stepfather, William Tanner, and quit. Now I was without work, and there was none available during the winter. So I wanted something to do. I went into the attic of the manse for something to read. For ministers in Alaska never throw away magazines. There I found an old catalog, cover torn off, but the name was there, Whitworth College, Tacoma, Washington. I figured that I would enter next year, and so I wrote for a news catalog. In about 10 days, I got an answer from Dr. Bernard Cruzy, and it sounded as if he had been holding a room for me all the time, and that I should hurry and get down there. I did around and rounded up about $125, and with that I started. My mother asked me, what are you going to do when you run out of money? To which I answered, oh, I will get a job, and when I have earned another $75, I will go back to school again. When I got to Whitworth, I discovered that if one is right there and on the job, doors open, and so it did for me. Sweeping, cutting grass at 25 cents an hour, milking cows, expenses were low too, and I got 50% discount on my room afforded the son of a missionary. My background in education was very spotty because Indian schools taught only English, history, and arithmetic. One teacher told us that mathematics was going out of style, and we could graduate even if we failed in algebra. And of course, we all did so. So, my first algebra was college algebra, and I jumped right into the third book of Caesar and took on geometry 2 months late. I went to my classes and sat by myself, digging away to catch up. Besides, I conquered on the football team and the basketball team and the baseball team, and helped edit the Whitworthian, helped to start a literary society, and later made the debating team with George Rossman, later Supreme Court Judge of Oregon, and became the leading man in the senior class play, Tennis and Sprinters. And what time was left, I kept books for the college, and just for fun I read 2,500 pages of Gibbon's Rome. And what time was left, I had a sweetheart.
I have to start with that photo. I just can't. But it's at the end of what I will go over There is a great power. I remember he's speaking to what is a fairly conservative Christian college at this time. So, and yet he doesn't use the Christian names per se. He wants to include, I think he wants to include everyone. There is a great power, and it didn't start when Christianity came to the Pacific Northwest. And the great power's involvement in a personal life gives purpose to the life, and this is what he felt his whole life. And this first part of his life was preparation, and it had to be done. And he begins with his mother, Tillie Paul. The 1863 date is a guess because, the earliest memory she has is of the end of the Civil War, being told that it was ending. And we think that maybe 1865, April, when did the information get here, and how old do you have to be to remember such a thing like that? It wasn't like you grew up in Georgia and you knew the war was over. It was Alaska. But Tillie was caught in the middle of the clash. The old ways were still pretty prevalent, the Tlingit ways, but this Christianity and miners and everybody was coming in and changing things drastically, and she really grew up in the midst of that. He jumps around here a little bit in the accidental death of his father, Louis. I want to spend just a minute about Uncle Snook, who was Tillie had come up from Victoria, where Ku-nuX-nuhsti heard that her Scottish husband was going to send her two daughters away to Scotland to be educated, and so she fled that and came back to Wrangell. She was probably already sick with tuberculosis at that time, and maybe that's what James Kinnan was manipulating at that time. We don't know. Anyway, she ends up back in Wrangell and dies about a year later. Tillie was holding her hand until it went cold, and there was no one else in the house, and she then hid until Uncle Snook and some others came home. Uncle Snook just loved her, though. He named her Katliud, the highly esteemed one, but Wrangell at that time was quite a place. This was, 1867. It gets bought by the U.S., and then 1869 it's bombed by the U.S., and in 1871 the Kaiser Gold Rush started, which brought thousands of miners into Wrangell, and it was a dangerous place for an adolescent girl to be. So Uncle Snook, he has an idea. I'll send her to a Tsimshian man to be married who can provide for her. Problem is, he's more than twice her age, and she doesn't want to go. She doesn't want the marriage. She gets down there, gets a chance to steal a canoe and starts paddling back herself. Makes it a few miles. They find her asleep on a rock somewhere because it's an impossible journey for a 13, 14-year-old girl to make. And somebody tells her, if you go to the missionaries, you don't have to get married. So that's what she does. She escaped the unwanted marriage after a prayer to her unknown God. making the first prayer to this god in a commercial jargon, Chinook. She did not speak Tsimshian. She spoke Tlingit and probably almost no English at that time, but there was Chinook. So the Methodist missionary was the Reverend Thomas Crosby, who took her in, and they didn't even know her name. They called her Sarah for about 2 years that she was there. Finally, Snook got word of it and sent for her, but no, there's no safe place for her there until enter the ministry of Sheldon Jackson. I think there's some people listening to this that probably only know Sheldon Jackson as a name, but generally speaking, he was an administrative missionary who, not exactly church planting, that was part of it, but he would go into an area where he would see a need, and then he would recruit people, raise money, and spent his whole life traveling, apparently. But Amanda McFarland, Home for Girls, that was the place for Tillie. And that's where she began to flourish, become bilingual. She was good at languages and actually did some sermon translating for the Reverend Thomas Crosby. Everything that happened to her and me seems like a miracle. Because of her, I was raised in the Presbyterian training school and unknowingly became a Christian and made that fact known to the world when I was 16 years of age at Carlisle, Pennsylvania. How she ends up at Sitka is after the death of her husband, Louis. She was still carrying her third son at the time, and Sheldon Jackson stepped in, gave her a place to live up there and a job, and I found this photograph. I love this one. This should be about 1887 in Sitka. And there is the Reverend Sheldon Jackson there in the hat, and that is Tillie standing behind him, holding Louis Jr., who is looks to be about 1 year of age. And in the front row, the little boy with the hat is Samuel Kendall, who was the firstborn son, and the little boy in white is William Lewis Paul. I only know that because I have another photograph that I know that it's William Lewis Paul and compared them. So the Sitka story was part of it. It's just wonderful for William Lewis Paul. And he meets all his basic friendships there. They shaped my life. I didn't know it, but I was being led in preparation for which I regard as my life's work, namely a missionary in the field of law for a primitive people who did not need another preacher, but did need a lawyer. That word primitive has some negative connotation these days. What it would mean back then is that here was a people that, yes, they knew law, their own laws. Yes, they knew political situations in their own culture, but the U.S. legal system and politics was quite another thing, and they needed a lawyer. Again, he reminds us that the great Creator has joined them together to the work which is credited to me when actually I was only the errand to their collective motives. And as his life goes on, this becomes quite evident. He jumps over to Whitworth College again, and when I returned to them from Whitworth College and 10 years of business experience, they had reached the area of inquiry, knowing that things were wrong, but not what, and lacking a guide. And then he gives a little Tlingit culture thing, because remember, he's speaking to people that probably don't know anything about Tlingit culture. So he adds that, and that warlike tribe of Tlingit Indians, well, which he doesn't mention them specifically, but we know that Tillie and Louis went to Klukwan for a year, which was at that time was a dangerous place to go, because there were people there that were asking for missionaries, and there was quite a strong following of people who did not want missionaries there, and there was a lot of trouble there. I put in a quote from a 1945 A&B ANS Grand Camp at Angoon. My own father, William Paul Jr., was the secretary at that camp, and I'll read the motion that Roy Paratovich made and Paul Sr. seconded. That we endorse the SJS plan of raising money. Paul Sr. added, SJS was mother and father to me. If it wasn't for the friends there, us fatherless children would not have been able to survive. One does not realize the value of schooling until deprived of it. The school is the seed of everything good in our midst. That's quite a statement to make. Now the Carlisle years, and these are his statements about Pratt are kind of hard to understand, but this is what he said. And he had to learn a couple of things at Carlisle Indian School that would absolutely necessary later. He kind of sums up what Richard Henry Pratt does in a very short statement, who exchanged the confinement of the sullen Apaches at San Marco near St. Augustine, Florida, for the discipline of the school at the old Haitian Army Barracks of Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Pratt was an adjunct officer in forts out west, and he witnessed, the adjunct officer is a executive officer taking care of the stuff in the fort kind of person, and they would capture Indians and they'd send them back to San Marco in Florida, and he witnessed this, and so he went back there and tried to make things better for them, but it was rather hopeless. They were just sending these natives back there to die. So he thought he would try Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Getting a government to back you on something like this was, I don't know how he did it. You had to kind of play along with the general idea, which was save the man, kill the Indian doctrine. But he thought if he first of all proved that the native was a human, this time of history, they're still wrestling with that. And there he learned something else. It can be done. Here's some Carlisle pictures from Grandpa's yearbook. I like this when he began to be a musician there. That's him next to the pole. That's an oboe. And another photo, which might be one of my favorites, is this one. William Paul there, looking a little sideways. He's looking out the window, and I think he's daydreaming, probably about the football field. He was a very good student, and he was a very good athlete too, which is more reinforce the it can be done kind of attitude. Carlisle Indian School in football is, I heard they're coming out with another Jim Thorpe movie. I wonder how they'll do this time. Maybe Charlton Heston was not, well, I don't know, he did all right. But he learned how to play football there well enough that he expected to get a scholarship at Dickinson Law School. But I wonder, he missed playing with Pop Warner by a couple of years. Pop Warner, the father of modern football, who got attracted to Carlisle Indian School, who was playing in the Ivy League and against Army and winning. And he came along and made it even better. And then Jim Thorpe came along, and they won twice as many games as they lost. And I wonder if, as a coach, Pop Warner thought that motivation for these young natives would be easy. And I kind of wonder if he would come up to a student and say, hey, do you want to go out on the football field and smash into another player as hard as you can? By the way, this is the son of a person who stole your land. You know, motivation is it really focuses you, and it's done by all athletes today to get that edge. And then there's the 1908 defeating, among others, the University of Oregon. Of course, he didn't mention the Washington game. What is little Whitworth doing playing Oregon and Washington? But this timing thing is really important, because when you go to college and get on a team, and you got 4 years, and if the right people aren't together, nothing much happens. And Whitworth is not exactly a football power. It was for a few years, though. And this was those years. But I'm getting a little ahead there with the football thing. Graduated from 1902 from Carlisle, planned to go to Dickinson School, but his mother got sick. And this is one of those pushes from the great creator that brought him back to Alaska, where he got reacquainted with the people, the Indians of Alaska. He didn't go back to Sitka. Tillie was married to William Tamery and living in Wrangell at this time. And then this part about in 1905, I agreed to go trapping with my stepfather, and they got into a violent altercation. William Tamery was it was a pretty good relationship, really. He was a good husband to Tillie. He built her that house that was just up there, and helped build the A&B hall. He was religious-minded like she was, and there was just this one time that I ever heard of where they got into a physical altercation. And again, I think this is a nudge from God, because God needs him somewhere. The great creator wants him down at Whitworth, and so he writes him a letter. And I wonder if that letter is in some kind of archive at Whitworth. I wonder if that letter said something like, and by the way, Dr. Cruzy, I play football. You know, I think that's worth looking for. But Dr. Cruzy replies immediately, in 10 days is an immediate response. And here's the residence in Whitworth College in 1906. And I like to fancy that those two young ladies, one of them is my grandmother, I think, but spotty education at Carlisle Indian School, but he caught up. He was a good student. Tillie recognized that while they were still at Sitka. She really urged him to go to Carlisle, and of course didn't get in his way about going to Whitworth either. She recognized that he was a very fast student. Unlike her, she said. She could learn things, but she didn't really love studying. And I think perhaps we've all seen the quarterback there, William Paul. On the other end of this is a very important person too, this was his first year there, Ernie Tanner, who was the first African American in the Pacific Northwest to play on a football team. And they apparently had the best backfield in the conference. So we did a lot more at Whitworth, and ends with, and what time was left me, I had a sweetheart. And sometimes this relationship was such an asset to not only to William, but to Tlingit society as well, and sometimes gets left out. Frances Lackey was her maiden name, and some of her accomplishments I've listed here too. She wrote the Spruce Root Basketry Book of Alaska in 1944. She was not a weaver herself, but she knew how to gather information and write, and she was a good writer, and she could put it down. She could also was enough of an artist that she could draw the weaving, and it's a very successful book. The Home Care of Tuberculosis, very needful book written with the BIA. Paul, my father, did the photography for that book. She was the president of the TB Association in Alaska. She wrote the book Kataha, The Childhood History of a Tlingit Girl, who was her mother-in-law, Tillie Paul. School teacher in Ketchikan, Cake and Juneau. She was an artist and documenter of Tlingit art and culture, adopted by the Nanyai and given the name Teeyhíttaan. She was a musician. She was a part-time secretary to William Lewis Paul, and I guess in her spare time she gave birth to 4 children. I've included some photographs of her because there are still people living in this town that may have had her as a teacher. I think, I know Marie Olson had Mrs. Paul as a teacher, for one. I like this picture because she's looking right in the camera, and she looks strong. And they were quite a pair. She was a musician. This would be from the 20s. And this photo here is while they were still in Portland. That would be, the short child is Fred Paul, and the taller one would be my father, William Paul Jr. And here they are back to Alaska. I think this would probably be somewhere around Ketchikan, where my father went to Ketchikan High School, and my father would be the one, the child in the back with his head in his hand, bored. This kind of brings us to the end of this, but it leaves a question: how did they get back to Alaska? They're still in Portland. What drew them back? What pushed them back to Alaska? What happened in Portland was that William Paul became rather famous as a singer. He tried out for the Apollo Singing Club, which was as high as you could go in Portland. There were 200 applicants for a position, and people told him, don't bother. He got chosen immediately, and he saw a music career opening for him. But that takes money. And William Tamry comes down to Portland, Oregon, and for an operation, and mentions that the way people are making a lot of money in Alaska is fish traps. He even knew where there was probably a good site for one, and so they burnt their bridges in Portland and went back to Wrangell. And I'll read some from my grandmother's memoirs. She states that, well, we had gone to Alaska to build a fish trap and get rich, then go to New York, where Will would continue his voice development and probably become famous. Our fish trap failed for more reasons than one, and we were left with the ambition to try another year, having learned from the experience of the first year. At the invitation of Louis Paul, Will's younger brother, the 12-year-old infant Alaska Native Brotherhood was holding a convention in Wrangell in November 1920. Delegates from Sitka, Juneau, Douglas, the boats bearing delegates joined forces and approached the town abreast with music sounding, and the delegates marched to the hall in a group. I remember Henry Stevens is in his long black cape, all very dramatic. Will had been pressed into service in planning a program for the honor of Wrangell, since Louis was the only previous member of the Brotherhood. Louis was president that year. He invited all the officials and heads of departments, even the ministers, to speak. Unanimously, they refused, even the ministers. So he had to research as well as he could the subjects that interested the A and B. I did not attend the meetings because I was too busy helping Will's mother entertain delegates. On the afternoon of the last day of the meetings, resolutions were scheduled, and I slipped away from the house to the meeting because I was curious to see what on earth these Indians wanted. Remember, she's never been in Alaska before. She'd been there a year, and she was finding things out. I was in time to hear a young Andrew Hope make a wonderfully moving plea to Will to stay in Alaska and become a delegate to Congress to plead for the abolishment of fish traps. His speech brought tears to my eyes. I forgot all about the musical education of my husband. Here was something worthwhile in life. And I made no objection when William decided to make our home in Alaska. And so we've come to a beginning here. They're back in Alaska, and I think, I'm not sure what my time is like here, but I think I will add just one more segment from my grandmother's memoirs. It was not in Will's nature to work hard all summer and laze around all winter, as seemed to be the universal pattern in Alaska. As a help in his work in the States as auditor and adjuster for the Fidelity and Deposit Company of Maryland, he had studied law. That was LaSalle University correspondence course. So he went down that fall to Ketchikan, where the district court was sitting, and took the bar examination. I don't know what the bar examination is like now, but in 1920, a committee of 3 lawyers was appointed to prepare a set of written questions, and later there was an oral examination by the district judge. The story of the examination was brought to Wrangell by a traveling salesman before Will got home. It seems that the committee was all set to prevent Will's passing the test. It would never do to have an Indian a member of the bar. For 3 whole days, Will had answered questions on the typewriter and was beginning to suspect some prejudice was at work. the salesman reported that a man in the smoking room of the Revilla Hotel had called out to one of the committee, "How are you coming with failing that Indian?" And the committeeman answered, "No go, the damn son of a bitch knows more than law than the judge does." Judge Jennings was lenient in the oral examination. He asked Will what a nonpartisan was. Will answered, "A Republican in a Democratic district or a Democrat in a Republican district." Judge Jennings smiled and admitted Will to the practice of law in Alaska. Later, he was admitted to the bar in Washington State and the Circuit Court and the Court of Claims. I was horrified at the salesman's report. And so that brings us back to 1920 in Alaska. How are we for time? Oh, perfect. Did you want to go for questions now? Oh, well, if you have a question, we'll do it now, because the problem with talking about William Paul is that he did so much that you could go off on tangents, and suddenly you're talking about artwork or something, instead of civil rights in Alaska.
Well, I don't see any questions in the chat on YouTube. However, if we want to field a question from the audience, I can run the microphone out to somebody. Would anybody like to ask a question right now? Is there anything you're dying to know? Kim?
Thanks, David. Ben, it seems like women were really prominent in William Paul's life, and his wife, Frances, was white, if I'm correct. And I just wonder how she fit in with the Tlingit community and the other natives in Alaska.
Well, the Nanyai adopted her in and gave her a Tlingit name. That's a good recommendation. The body of work that she produced with her artwork, at my house, I have hundreds of her drawings. Last summer, Emily Moore came by the house. She was doing something at the Burke, and she wanted to know if there was some kind of correspondence between Marius Barbeau and my grandmother about the identification of a blanket, I think, and there it was. And there's just a wealth of knowledge, and she just drew everything. And if she drew it, my father took a picture of it. So there's just a lot there. It's enough of an influence that you just wonder, does William Paul, does he accomplish things he did without Frances Paul? Yeah, we don't know, but anything else?
Are there any other questions in the audience?
I will be around the rest of the day and tomorrow too, if you want to look at old pictures and stuff.
Thank you very much for sharing that part of William's life that a lot of us don't know about, his early life and what it was like growing up. But I just have to say that, I'm a big fan of William L. Paul Sr. And you know that we named the archives after him for his many contributions. And since right now we're really celebrating and looking at the 50th anniversary of ANCSA, I have to say that William L. Paul Sr. should be regarded as the father of native land claims. He started his work, as you could see there, but the real beginnings, where it was in 1929 at the A&B convention in Haines, when the A&B with William Paul and Judge Wickersham was there, adopted that resolution to pursue the native land claims. The initial years of the A&B was spent on civil rights, achieving civil rights for Native people. But for a Tlingit man to bring a lawsuit all the way to the Supreme Court, the Teeyhíttaan case, is, an achievement despite the fact that he lost. But he had the courage, he had the will, he had the determination, to fight for our land claims. He credits a Simpson as urging him on, Peter Simpson. Peter Simpson asked, "Whose land is it?" And William answered, "It's our land." And Peter says, "Then why don't you fight for it?" And that's what the Alaska Native Brotherhood started to do under the leadership of William Paul. But I just had to say that, from my perspective, and in all the work that I do in giving lectures about native land claims, I have to say that we must acknowledge him as the father of native land claims. We've had many, many great leaders who have come after him, but he was the one that began him. He wrote to Etuk in the North Slope in the 1960s and told him, "You guys need to file for your claims of ownership." And Etuk responded about 20 years later and said, "I'm responding to your letter." And that began, the land claims, Angsa land claims as we know it. So I just had to say that for the record. I didn't want it. I mean, this was a wonderful lecture. I'm glad that, we got to learn about the beginnings, the things that made him. It seems like there are lots of contradictions, in what he says, what he did. But we also have to remember it was at the time, what it was like in the 20s, and what, even though, William Pratt was so bad, William took the best of it and learned and made it work for us as Native people. The fact that he learned how to run a printing press, that was probably one of the greatest things that he learned from Carlisle. So even though we in the contemporary period tend to really dismiss Carlisle or even talk about it in very negative ways, he was able, to turn those things around. And I just wanted to say that I benefited directly from his teachings. I became his student when I was 10 years old. And to me, he is a superhero. And thank you for your talk.
Thank you for those words, Rosie. I second that in that I'm not sure that the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian people, myself, realize how big a thing this Alaska thing is. This doesn't happen. It didn't happen anyplace else. It was a completely different story, and we have something here if we will learn it and remember it. I tell people in Seattle, 44 million acres. Yeah, how big is that? I don't even know how big that is. What's as big as the state of Washington? Given back to natives. Of course, Grandpa voted against it. He thought he wanted more, but that's another story. Anything else?
Well, I don't see anything else in the chat, but we can certainly field more questions from the audience.
Thank you also. I would like to, is that going? I would like to thank you too for your talk today. find it interesting to learn about how he became a lawyer in Ketchikan, because the little research I've done in Ketchikan was, I found that he was involved in so many issues there, and I don't think they've all been documented. I've looked a little bit about his fights against, Heckman Company and the taking over the tidelands and schools, and at that time, the General Land Office was approving the sale of Indian lots, and so transfer of Indian land to along the tidelands to non-natives and all. And he was just involved in so many issues, and wondering if there are any records or any information about all of those cases and works that he did, and where those are.
The most complete work I've seen on Teeyhíttaan versus U.S. was by Diane Purvis, who is the Drive of Civilization. It's been out about 3 years. It's legal history. It's not a novel, but when Rosita mentioned it, I thought of that. And what happened with the A&B and the highly organized A&B and ANS and lawyers getting involved, it must have scared the heck out of the U.S. government, because this was their own system. They were being beat by their own system, and you had to get control of that, and it scared people. And and that, even though Teeyhíttaan lost, it still served that purpose. I mean, how many lawsuits are we going to have to put up with here? There's another one, you say? Oh, Tlingit Central Council is coming up? Okay. It was, and Ketchikan, we lived in Ketchikan, or he did, for a while. My father went to Ketchikan High School, but no, there's a lot of research to be done and organizing of the history there.
I just also wanted to acknowledge your father, William L. Paul Jr. He was a lawyer, and he was lawyering at a time where there many, many cases were brought against Alaska Natives for our hunting and fishing, and he defended them, but I know he didn't always get paid, or he might have gotten paid with fish or things like that. And I know it was one of the reasons why he had to leave Alaska, because his clients just weren't, they thought payment was, fish and things like that. Well, that was probably all they could afford. But it's also a period that we really need to do more research on, is that, the kind of work that he did. So I also just wanted to pay tribute to him and to, acknowledge that you had a great father that fought for Alaska Natives, although his work is not as well known, but he was here at a period where, it's kind of like that today. It hasn't changed a whole lot. We still have a lot of lawsuits against the Alaska Native people for hunting and fishing, but your dad was there at the forefront, and he did a great job.
Thank you for that, Rosita. Yes, my father graduated law school in 1939 and wrote his thesis on native land claims. And really, that's what you do when you're going to sue somebody, is you get together all the evidence, all the proof, what the precedents that have gone on, and then you proceed. He came back, he was A&B secretary 6 times, from 39 till 53, I think, and yes, he ran out of gas, and he came down to Seattle. We all moved down to Seattle in 54, where he became a King County prosecuting attorney on the civil side, and until he won a big case against that airplane company. Boeing, and huge tax case. He nailed them for $725,000, in back taxes and then more taxes, and that was a political thing. It cost him his job. So he died when I was 21 years old in 1974. Thanks for mentioning him. Anything else?
Thank you for sharing all of your history. Is there any more questions from the audience? I don't see any on the live stream. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to leave us with?
No, I'm going to go up to St. Anne's Hospital, where I was born, and look across the street to see if there are still houses that are there. They lived in a house right across the street from them when they were William Sr. did. We lived at 1644 Glacier Avenue, and I might. That's a little bit of a walk out there, though. So, good day.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben. Our next lecture will be... Our next lecture will be this Friday, November 19th, and it will be offered in person and online. The lecture is titled Fighter in Velvet Gloves, Alaska Civil Rights Hero Elizabeth Peratrovich, and it will be presented by Ann Bootcheever. Thank you for joining.